Hi, welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about the continued ramping up of the sanctions against Russia. We're seeing this almost on a daily basis now. More and more sanctions are being added and more Russian companies are being identified and targeted. And in today's episode, I want to talk about what's been going on with cybercrime and ransomware, because lots of Russian businesses have been rumored to be involved in some of these major attacks that have been taking place over the last couple of years. And 3 Russian providers have now been sanctioned by the USA, the UK, and lots of other countries. And this is going to hurt the Russian economy, not just from an embarrassment point of view, but also from an economic and global digitization perspective. Now, before we get into all of that, firstly, can I ask anybody that hasn't subscribed to please hit that subscribe button, because I'm trying to grow my numbers, and even though I do put little messages in the videos, they don't really have that much impact. So if you just hit that button right now, I'm not actually doing anything. It's not a real subscription. You're not paying me anything, but it does help me with the algorithm. And also, I wanted to give you the heads up that I have got something massive coming very soon. I can't tell you what it is because I'm still working on the legal details for it, but this is going to be the biggest thing that I've ever been involved with, and hopefully you'll find it really interesting and maybe a bit of fun and an interesting way to support the channel. But I'll tell you more about that as soon as I'm able to. But if you've been following the news, you'll know that there's been a ton of different businesses that have been really badly impacted by cyber attacks over the past few years. And it's not just commercial entities. We're talking about hospitals, schools, and government systems that have been taken down by hackers. And a lot of those incidents have been linked to businesses in Russia. There's always rumors in the press that these are Russian entities, or they're based in Russia, or they're hiding behind Russian systems, and very difficult to track down who these actual hackers are. And I wanted to go through what the impact of some of these attacks has been. So in the United States, it's estimated that around $35 billion worth of value is lost from businesses each year due to ransomware attacks and cyber attacks. In the UK, it's around £15 billion, and worldwide, it's estimated to impact the global economy by around $200 billion every single year. We're talking about lots of different impacts. So if we go through some examples, in the USA, Colonial Pipeline had major fuel disruption as a result of a cyber attack. JBS Meat Processing saw a global shutdown. MGM Resorts had their casinos paralyzed when ATMs went down, room keys were disabled, and slot machines went offline. CNA Financial paid a $40 million ransom after a severe ransomware breach. In the UK, the Co-op retailer had major problems with its stocking systems after a cyber attack. Marks and Spencer had to close down its online services as a result of major hacking problems. Boots had payroll data for 40,000 staff stolen. JD Sports, the retailer, had a data breach which affected 10 million customers. And WH Smith also had its staff data exposed. And Jaguar Land Rover had to close down its operations as a result of production problems impacted by these cyber attacks. And there's also been other incidents with companies such as the Royal Mail, and aerospace and defence supply chain systems have been severely impacted. And in Australia, there have been healthcare and university hackings, and companies like Medibank and Latitude Finance have also been severely impacted. So these are just some examples, but there are thousands of other businesses that are being impacted on a daily basis by all of these cyber attacks. And a lot of them are linked back to servers that are operating out of Russia. So you may be sitting there thinking, well, why doesn't somebody do something about this? Why don't they just close down all of these online hosting services to stop them enabling all of this cyber crime? Well, that's what would happen in most countries, because there are rules and regulations, and the big players all adhere to the concept of shutting down any illegal activity. But in Russia and other countries, there are what's known as bulletproof hosting providers. And these companies ignore takedown requests, host malware, ransomware, and phishing services, conceal the identity of clients, specialize in high risk and criminal use, and they are the technical backbone that ransomware groups rely upon. Now, as I mentioned at the start of today's video, there have been 3 companies in Russia that have been identified and sanctioned directly now, and this has been put into place by the USA, the UK, and Australia. And those companies are Media Land LLC, which is a major Russian bulletproof hosting provider based in St. Petersburg. It's hosted servers for ransomware gangs, including Lockbit and Blacksuit, who are quite famous, and marketed a no questions asked hosting to criminals and high-risk clients. The second company is called LM Cloud LLC, which is a sister company to Media Land. It's provided cloud servers, VPNs, proxies, and anonymized routing used in ransomware operations, and it's found repeatedly in investigations into attacks in the UK, US, and Australia. And the third company is called Aza Group LLC, which is another bulletproof hosting network which has frequently changed its corporate names to avoid detection. So what do the new sanctions actually do, and will they stop these companies from being able to operate? Well, the UK, Australia, and the USA have basically blocked all assets and financial flows connected to these companies and the individuals linked to them. They've also been directly sanctioned. They've lost all access to Western financial systems, the use of Western domain registrars, hosting and payment providers, travel for named individuals, so they won't be able to travel anywhere, and any business relationships with Western companies have now been cut. And this will cause the cyber criminals involved in these attacks to rebuild their infrastructure somewhere else, so not within these entities in Russia, use less reliable and more expensive hosting, take more risks that increase the chance of exposure or arrest, and they will lose access to stable financial channels for ransom payments. So what are the implications of this for Russia and the Russian economy? Well, firstly, these ransom attacks, they're designed to make money. So they actually make a lot of cash from hitting companies' systems and then demanding some form of payment in order to put them back to where they were. And as we talked about earlier in the video, some companies have actually paid tens of millions of dollars ransom to sort this situation out. It's unbelievable in today's modern age that companies are actually happy to pay over money when they're being blackmailed, because the problem with blackmail is, where does it ever stop? Because once you've made one payment, surely you're always opening yourself up to future blackmail attempts. Well, it is happening, and unfortunately, the criminals keep doing it because they're making money from it. And that money ultimately is flowing through to the Russian economy. So Russia will see a reduction in the amount of revenue that it's earning from this illegal form of operation. There's also an embarrassment factor for Russia because it's now official that these 3 Russian companies have been sanctioned because they're allowing this criminal activity to take place all around the world. But it will also make it more difficult for these cyber criminals to operate going forward, because the companies identified have now lost access to global internet and also access to the financial systems through which some of those payments were actually being facilitated. But from Russia's point of view, this is just another element of the sanctions that is going to make it more difficult for Russian businesses to keep operating, albeit these businesses that we're talking about here, a lot of the money that they're pulling in is coming from illegal activities. Hopefully, it will stop some of those illegal activities. I'm sure there will be other Russian companies that will be popping up. However, as it's becoming more difficult to get new access to the global internet for Russian businesses, it might prove more challenging for the criminals to be able to find a reliable source to be able to hack into all of these companies' accounts and systems. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because we've been talking a lot about the increase in the sanctions. And once again here, we've seen direct sanctions being applied against Russian businesses. So at the start of the war, it was just generic sanctions about oil and gas. However, over the past few months, we are seeing a targeted effort where individual companies are now being hit. And as a result of that, we're seeing lots of problems in the Russian economy. So I talked recently about Rosneft and Lukoil, who are probably the 2 biggest examples. The biggest and the second largest oil companies in Russia now are unable to trade. They're unable to access financial systems. And what we've talked about in today's video is the West trying to sort out what's been going on with cybercrime, because cybercrime is an increasing problem all across the globe. Lots of companies are being impacted, and the impact of this cybercrime is getting worse. So we talked about some examples earlier that companies have actually lost access to some of their online services. We've seen complete shutdowns of manufacturing companies as a result of the fact that they've been hit with these hacks that basically are taking out the way they operate. So all of us are becoming more and more dependent on the internet, online systems. And if those online systems suddenly go down, it was interesting to note that ChatGPT, for example, and X both had to go down recently because there was an online service provider that had problems. And I think that impacts people in a real life way when you're suddenly used to doing things and then an app suddenly just disappears off your phone or it just isn't working. It does throw out the way people go about their daily lives. But for businesses, they are inherently dependent on these online systems. So when they are hacked, it's a major problem. And a lot of these hackers are demanding cash to sort out the problem. So they basically break your system and then say, you need to pay us to fix your system, to put it back to where it was before we hacked it. And amazingly, some companies are making these payments. I talked earlier about a US company that paid a $40 million ransom. That is amazing because that's only going to encourage future hacks, because if you've just received $40 million, then why wouldn't you try it again? And because a lot of these hackers have been hiding in Russia, very difficult to trace them because we've got these bulletproof service providers who are happy to allow their customers to do whatever they like. They're not having any control in terms of the criminality going on here. That's been going on, that's been facilitating these global attacks. So the USA, the UK, and Australia have had enough. They've identified these three large companies in Russia as being facilitators for this global crime. So they're now sanctioned. That's going to make it more difficult in the short term for the hackers to be able to continue hacking. Now, I'm sure they will already be looking at plan B, plan C, plan D, because you won't stop hacking just by sanctioning these three companies. But what it does do is send a message to Russia that Russia can't get away with allowing crime to continue. So if companies are identified now as being the root source of where these hacks are coming from, they will be hit with more sanctions. And this is just another piece of the jigsaw in terms of the sanctions trying to cancel out Russia's involvement in the global economy and also to reduce its revenue. So I wanted to highlight this. It probably isn't as big an impact as the direct sanctions on the oil companies. That's going to hurt Russia a lot over the next 6 to 12 months because it's losing a huge amount of revenue. The revenue from these internet providers is nowhere near as large, but I think it sends a very clear signal that the West has had enough. It's increasing the sanctions to make sure that Russia's involvement in things like cybercrime is reduced and basically stop Russia from allowing these sorts of businesses to grow up. And the West is basically saying, we won't stop with our sanctions until the war in Ukraine ends. So I think we're just seeing another movement down that road. At some point, there will be an agreement to end the war. The markets have actually bounced back a little bit, partially on the news that the increase in the sanctions is potentially going to encourage Russia to bring a stop to the war. The USA is also currently working on a deal that could be potentially acceptable to both parties to bring this war to an end. So we'll see whether or not that does happen. But I just wanted to highlight what the latest sanctions are in today's video, because I think it's interesting that cybercrime, which seems to have gone unaffected really for the last 3.5 years, is now on the list of things to sort out, and Russian companies are now being sanctioned directly. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative, and hopefully thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you so much to everyone that's supporting me. If you bought me a coffee, sent me a YouTube super thanks, or signed up as a patron, a YouTube member, or buy me a coffee member, thank you for that support. Really helps keep me going. And here's something to put a smile on your face.